What if the habits that separate the ultra-wealthy from everyone else are not luck, exotic secrets, or insider deals, but a repeatable set of mental rules and daily choices you can adopt this week? This audiobook summary exposes the operating system behind lasting wealth, how the rich allocate attention and capital, why they treat risk as a controlled instrument rather than a gamble, how they turn small optionality advantages into life-changing outcomes, and which practical rituals produce compounding results over decades. Each chapter that follows is a compact workshop, clear rules, short experiments you can run in days, and measurable signals that tell you when to scale and when to stop. This is not motivational fluff. It is a tactical playbook. Apply one rule for 12 days, measure the outcome, and keep what works. Over time, the repeated, boring choices become the architecture of freedom. If you want real, evidence-based steps to build wealth rather than wishful thinking, stay with this audio until the end. If the ideas help you, do one simple thing right now. Subscribe to the channel for weekly, practical summaries like this, and press like to tell the algorithm and me that you want more content built for action, not hype. Subscribing and liking keeps a steady stream of tested, usable strategies coming to your feed. Chapter 1. The Wealth Architecture, Rules over Goals. The first secret the wealthy practice is less glamorous than it sounds. They build architectures of rules that remove the need for constant decision-making. Instead of relying on pure willpower or lofty goals that burn bright and then fade, they design guardrails and default behaviors that steer outcomes automatically. Start by defining 3 durable rules that will govern your money and time decisions for the next 12 months. Make each rule operational and testable. A powerful example is the margin rule. Always preserve 3 months of living expenses before funding any optional spending. Another is the compound deployment rule. Automate a fixed percentage of incoming cash to productive uses before you touch the remainder. The third can be the optionality rule. Commit a small, fixed portion of capital to experiments that can produce asymmetric returns. Cap downside exposure. These rules shrink the daily cognitive tax and free your attention to execute high-value experiments rather than wrestle with moment-to-moment impulses. Rules become reliable when they combine clarity with rituals. Convert each rule into a tiny ritual, an automated transfer that executes on payday for the compound deployment rule, a weekly calendar check where you confirm margin levels and log any deviations, and a 12-day pilot template for every optionality experiment that specifies an entry stake, a measurable signal, and a kill point. Wealthy people treat their rules like infrastructure. They improve them incrementally, but do not break them for emotion. Next, build a home for your rules. One page, visible, and revisited weekly. Write the rule, the trigger condition, the ritual, and the evidence you will collect to show whether the rule is working. This visible rule book does 2 things. It externalizes accountability, and it creates a decision habit library you can scale by teaching to partners or team members. A useful habit is the monthly structure audit, a 15-minute review where you answer 3 questions. Did the rules guide me this month? Which rules need tweak? And what was the single biggest deviation and why? That brief practice surfaces friction early and prevents slippage from becoming a drift into impulsive upgrades or riskier behavior. Finally, remember, rules are not rigid dogma. They are default protocols with explicit escape hatches. Define those escape hatches in advance in measured terms. What data or circumstances would justify temporarily overriding a rule, and who must be consulted. Predefining escape hatches has two benefits. It protects against panic-driven deviation, and it preserves your long-game optionality while allowing tactical flexibility when rare high-probability windows appear. The wealthy seldom fetishize rules for virtue. They treat them as tools that preserve optionality, reduce regret, and convert small, consistent advantages into profound, long-term effects. Adopt 3 operational rules. Today, automate the supporting rituals and schedule the first structure audit next week. Do that and you will have started building the architecture that makes wealth a predictable, engineered outcome rather than a sequence of lucky events. Chapter 2. Income Design, Turning Time into Systems. The second secret wealthy people use is systematic income design. They treat their ability to earn as a portfolio to be diversified, automated, and productized rather than a single time-for-money source that caps upside. Start by mapping your current income streams and classify each along 3 dimensions: effort per incremental dollar, replicability, and distribution friction. You will find a mix of high-effort, low-replicability items and perhaps 1 or 2 more scalable activities. The practical path is to stabilize a dependable active income channel that covers essentials and then allocate time to convert a portion of that effort into repeatable products or systems. Productization is the core move. Compress your unique knowledge into a standardized deliverable, an online course, a repeatable workshop, a licensed template, or a subscription micro-product. The first product should be deliberately minimal, solve a narrow problem, ship quickly to a small cohort, and measure retention or outcomes. Keep the economic simple price the offer so that early customers pay a non-trivial share of your target margin, and so you can iterate without desperation. Once you have fit, design automated fulfillment, automated onboarding emails, templated support answers, and a small feedback loop that gathers improvement points from the first cohort. Distribution is often the bottleneck, not the product. Look for partnerships with existing audiences where you can pilot your product in exchange for revenue share or data access. Such pilots reduce customer acquisition cost and validate demand. A second lever for income design is leverage through other people. Convert process into playbooks and hire or contract operators who can deliver at a price that preserves margin. Start with short trials and quality checks to ensure standards. The governance rule is to preserve your decision rights for strategy and creative direction while delegating executional flow. Finally, reinvest a portion of early profits into distribution and capability building. Small experiments in paid channels, content that showcases outcomes, or tools that reduce operational friction. Over time, your income portfolio should include at least 1 active stabilizer, 1 productized engine, and 1 leveraged distribution channel. That mix converts the linear constraints of your time into scalable systems that compound cash flow and buy you time to find new asymmetries. Chapter 3. Risk Management and Asymmetric Bets. Wealthy individuals do not avoid risk, they manage it with precision and use optionality to tilt for upside. The difference between gambling and investing is that the wealthy define downside clearly and stage exposure so that failures remain small and learning is quick. Start with downside protection, emergency cash, basic insurance, and a cap on leverage that prevents forced liquidation. Next, create an optionality allocation, a small, predetermined fraction of capital reserved for high upside, low-cost probes. Structure each probe as a bounded experiment, set an entry stake, define a measurable signal for scaling, and implement a tough kill rule. For example, if you are testing a small business offering, allocate a pilot budget, set weekly traction thresholds that must be met, and plan to stop if the metrics fail for 2 consecutive weeks. This staged approach converts curiosity into disciplined exposure. Asymmetric bets often live in underpriced time or attention rather than in exotic financial instruments. Early adopter partnerships, small concentrated investments in underfollowed niches, or hands-on experiments in product market fit. An important habit is to maintain a decisions ledger. Before you act, write the thesis, the worst plausible outcome, and the signal you will watch to change course. That documentation forces clarity and reduces the hero narrative that amplifies risk. Another practical technique is to use insurance-like hedges for concentrated positions, a small tail hedge, short-duration cash reserves, or contractual protections that transfer downside. Finally, perform scenario planning for every major allocation. Define base, upside, and stress scenarios with explicit numbers and probabilities. This numerical discipline removes romanticism and lets you scale exposure in a way that preserves long-term compounding. Managed risk plus staged optionality is how the wealthy create repeated large winners without risking ruin. Chapter 4. The Psychology of Wealth, Identity, Patience, and Quiet Confidence. Money decisions are rarely about arithmetic alone. They are profoundly psychological. The wealthy cultivate identity, patience, and a quiet confidence that reduces reactive behavior. Identity is a practical tool, not a slogan. Define the persona you want to be in the language of specific actions rather than adjectives. Instead of saying, "I am successful," state, "I ship 1 market-validated product every quarter, and I preserve margin equal to 3 months of expenses." The behavioral consequence is a bias toward execution and rule consistency rather than toward image maintenance. Patience is the discipline of holding good positions and letting time work. Wealthy people institutionalize patience with long horizon buckets for capital and by automating periodic investments. They also use checkpoints to decide when to act on new information rather than reacting emotionally to noise. Quiet confidence comes from repeated small wins and from public accountability that raises the cost of irrational shifts. Create a small accountability network, 2 or 3 peers who review 1 decision memo per month and provide blunt, low-friction feedback. This social mirror prevents hubris and sharpens judgment. Another psychological habit is deliberate constraint to use limits are freeing. Caps on lifestyle upgrades, pre-commitment to savings, and strict experimentation budgets that prevent escalation. All of these reduce decision fatigue and support consistent long-term compounding. Finally, practice gratitude and perspective rituals. Write 1 line a day about what optionality you preserved this week and why it mattered. These small exercises anchor you in the long game and reduce the mental urgency that leads to poor choices. Wealth is often as much about temperament as technique. Cultivate the identity and rituals that preserve patience and confidence, and your choices will be calmer, clearer, and more compounding. Chapter 5. Legacy Engineering, Using Wealth to Expand. Freedom and Meaning. The final secret the rich employ is to design wealth as infrastructure for a life, not as an end in itself. Legacy engineering begins with clarity about what freedom looks like for you, how many hours to work, which relationships to prioritize, and what kinds of projects you want optionality to pursue. Translate that clarity into an income target that funds the lifestyle choices and a set of binding financial policies that keep you on track once the target is met. Beyond personal freedom, legacy is about structure making wealth durable across time. Implement basic governance immediately, even if your estate seems small. Clear directives, a simple will, and a plan for who makes decisions when you cannot. For business owners, design succession with staged responsibility transfer and documented playbooks for critical roles so operations survive founder transitions. Philanthropy is another lever wealthy people integrate deliberately. They treat giving as a repeatable budget line and measure social return with the same rigor they apply to investments. Small, consistent giving often produces outsized social capital and deep personal meaning. Finally, teach stewardship. Bring the next generation into governance early with small responsibilities, financial literacy experiments, and shared decision sessions that scale involvement over time. Legacy is more than money. It is the combination of financial durability, governance, purpose, and education that converts wealth into lasting freedom and meaningful contribution. Start your legacy engineering by writing a one-page freedom statement, automating the financial flows to support it, and drafting a simple succession checklist you review annually. Do that, and your wealth will begin serving the life you intend rather than the other way around. Chapter 6. Strategic Partnerships and Network Leverage. Wealthy people multiply their impact by intentionally building partnerships and networks that extend their reach and compress time to value. The practical work begins with mapping your current network and identifying 3 categories that matter most for scaling influence and income. Distribution partners who can amplify your offerings, skill partners who complement technical gaps, and capital partner who bring funding coupled with useful constraints. Start by auditing relationships you already possess and rate them on immediate utility, trust level, and capacity to scale. This map shows where low-friction collaboration is possible and where you must invest social capital first. The next step is designing pilot collaborations that are narrowly scoped, time-boxed, and metric-driven. Instead of proposing a vague joint opportunity, design a short pilot with 3 clear outputs, a minimum viable joint offer, a short data collection plan to measure market response, and a revenue share or trial compensation that aligns incentives. Pilots reduce negotiation overhead, create a visible early win, and reveal operational fit. Wealthy people structure partnerships with explicit governance. They define decision rights, communication rhythm, and exit conditions before significant resources flow. Use simple written agreements even for early pilots to avoid ambiguity and preserve relationships when scaling decisions get emotional. Distribution leverage often outperforms building an audience from scratch. Seek partners who already reach your target buyer persona and propose a small, low-risk test. For example, license a single module of your product to a complementary platform in exchange for audience access and a modest revenue share. The metrics to watch are cost of customer acquisition through the partner, conversion rate, and retention. If conversion and margin justify scale, codify the replication playbook and sign a longer-term agreement. Network leverage also includes intentional introductions and reciprocity. Wealthy operators treat introductions as scarce assets. They prepare concise context notes when making introductions and expect a small reciprocation such as a useful resource, a short briefing, or a curated contact in return. This reciprocity amplifies trust and prevents favors from being one-sided. Another key habit is to formalize a small advisory circle. Rather than scattered advice, invite 3 to 5 peers or mentors into a monthly 30-minute review where you present one decision memo, one experiment result, and one ask. That cadence creates accountability, reduces blind spots, and surfaces opportunities quickly. Finally, manage reputation proactively because social trust compounds into preferential deals. Deliver reliably on small promises, publish short public artifacts that demonstrate competence, and practice prompt follow-up. Over time, your network becomes an engine of optionality. Early access to deals, distribution channels that scale offers, and partnerships that lower execution cost. Strategic partnerships are not serendipity. They are the product of deliberate mapping, disciplined pilots, reciprocal behavior, and governance that preserves relationships while amplifying capacity. Chapter 7. Legal, Tax, and Structural Efficiency. Preserving and compounding wealth requires attention to the legal and tax architecture that shapes after-tax returns and risk exposure. Wealthy individuals invest modest time and resources upfront to align entity structures with economic activities so that legal clarity reduces friction when scaling or transferring assets. The process begins with cataloging activity types, revenue-generating business operations, intellectual property, passive investment income, and personal consumption. Each activity has preferred legal wrappers for liability isolation, tax efficiency, and governance. For example, operating ventures often live in an entity that bears normal business risk, while valuable intellectual property can be centrally held in a distinct entity licensed back to operations. That separation preserves downside protection and simplifies eventual transfer or sale. Tax planning is not about aggressive avoidance. It is about matching legal form to expected life cycle of value while staying fully compliant. Use basic tools such as retirement accounts where allowed, timing income recognition sensibly, and selecting tax-efficient investment vehicles for long-term holdings. The wealthy use simple rules, automate tax-advantaged contributions, periodically harvest losses in taxable accounts to offset gains, and structure distributions in low-tax years when possible. Insurance is a preservation lever. Professional liability, property coverage, and umbrella policies protect against catastrophic events that would otherwise force liquidation of growth assets. Consider contractual protections for key partnerships and revenue streams, clear scopes of work, termination clauses, and IP ownership provisions avoid disputes that consume time and capital. For those operating cross-border, anticipate withholding tax, transfer pricing, and local compliance. Consult specialists early because retroactive fixes are expensive. Succession planning is another structural necessity. Even modest estates benefit from a straightforward roadmap, directives, power of attorney, and a concise will or trust that reflects how assets should be managed or distributed. For business owners, prepare an exit playbook that includes documented processes, key role descriptions, and valuation expectations so transitions are orderly rather than disruptive. Finally, build a lightweight governance calendar, quarterly legal reviews, annual tax optimization check-ins, and periodic insurance audits. Small recurring attention prevents errors and reduces surprise. The practical payoff is simple. Clarity in legal and tax structure lowers friction, preserves capital. Chapter 8. behavioral routines, and daily wealth. Habits, sustained wealth, is the product of daily habits that reduce friction, sharpen judgment, and compound small advantages. Wealthy people do not rely on rare inspiration. They engineer routines that make good choices routine. Begin with 3 keystone practices to anchor your daily financial behavior. The first is a weekly financial review that takes no more than 30 minutes and covers leading indicators, not just accounts balance. Track cash runway days, 1 revenue experiment metric, and 1 spending category that deviated from allocation. The second practice is ritualized margin maintenance, automated transfers to a margin account, and a weekly quick check that the margin target remains intact. The third is a decision ledger in which every meaningful financial choice is recorded with a short thesis, the downside, and the signal you will watch to change course. These 3 small practices create a culture of evidence and reduce impulsive drift. Habits around learning are equally important. Allocate a fixed, short window each week for domain-specific growth reading or listening, and capture 1 practical application to test within 7 days. This keeps your edge fresh without overcommitting attention. Time blocking protects high-leverage work. Wealthy practitioners reserve prime blocks for creative or income-generating tasks and treat them as non-negotiable. Use guardrails to avoid decision fatigue, delegate routine operational decisions, and automate recurring financial flows. Social habits matter too. Choose peer groups that model prudent, long-term behavior and schedule regular accountability conversations where you share 1 win and 1 mistake. Mistake sharing normalizes learning and reduces costly secrecy. Mental frameworks, simple rules of thumb, help under pressure. For example, cap any speculative allocation to a small fixed % of deployable capital and require a staged pilot before scaling. Use space and ritual to manage emotional spikes before major choices. A brief pause with structured questions about downside and signals often prevents regret. Finally, build small, visible reminders of long-term goals, such as a 1-line freedom statement that you review weekly. These reminders tilt daily trade-offs toward compounding rather than consumption. When repeated, these daily habits erode psychological barriers, preserve optionality, and accumulate meaningful advantage over years. Chapter 9: Philanthropy, Purpose, and Social Return. Wealthy individuals often integrate purposeful giving as a disciplined part of their financial architecture because philanthropy generates social return, personal fulfillment, and network amplification. The practical approach starts by defining what gives you meaning and then structuring giving to align with measurable impact and repeatability. First, clarify whether you prefer direct hands-on involvement or strategic grant-making that funds intermediaries. Both are valid but require different operational patterns. Small, regular giving often produces greater compound social effect than infrequent large gifts. Automate modest, recurring donations to organizations you trust and complement them with periodic, direct engagement such as mentoring or pro bono services. For larger philanthropic projects, treat them like investments, set clear objectives, define metrics for success, pilot on a small scale, and iterate based on feedback. Use partnerships with non-profit operators who have proven execution capabilities rather than starting new organizations unless there is a clear and unique gap. Giving can be tax efficient when aligned with appropriate vehicles, such as donor-advised funds or foundations, but structure should follow strategy, not the other way around. Measure social return the way you measure other investments. Define the outcome you seek and the short list of signals that indicate progress. Wealthy philanthropists also use giving to build social capital, sponsoring community events, supporting local initiatives, or funding scholarships that connect to their networks and values. Finally, teach stewardship. Involve family or close partners in governance of philanthropic decisions early through small shared projects and transparent reporting. This practice builds continuity and converts giving into a legacy that reflects values as well as assets. Philanthropy done methodically multiplies social impact and often returns personal clarity about what freedom is meant to enable. Chapter 10. Guardrails, Common Pitfalls, and Staying the Course. As wealth grows, complexity increases and common pitfalls become more dangerous if unguarded. The wealthy mitigate these risks by installing simple, pre-committed guardrails and by maintaining disciplined routines that surface problems early. Common traps include lifestyle inflation that quietly consumes optionality, overconfidence leading to excessive concentration, and social pressure that normalizes escalating consumption. Address lifestyle inflation by codifying upgrade protocols, require a 30-day delay for large lifestyle changes, mandate an offset or margin preservation action, and run a short experience test whenever possible rather than an immediate permanent upgrade. Manage concentration risk with explicit caps and kill thresholds, and by ensuring a liquid reserve that prevents forced exits in stress. For social pressure, create transparent norms with close peers. Share your freedom statement so friends know what choices you prioritize, and reduce friction when declining status-driven offers. Governance failures are frequent. Prevent them with a lightweight playbook that spells out who can sign contracts, how large expenditures are approved, and what succession steps trigger. Decision fatigue is another silent failure mode. Counter it by automating routine flows, delegating low-value work, and protecting weekly prime blocks for high-leverage thinking. Regularly scheduled external reviews with trusted advisors are invaluable as they provide objective perspective and often spot slow drift that internal teams miss. Finally, plan for the emotional aspects. Wealth can bring isolation and hidden expectation. Maintain a small circle of candid peers and mentors, practice gratitude, and schedule time for non-financial pursuits that anchor identity outside net worth. The combination of structural guardrails, recurring audits, and emotional routines keeps compounding on track while reducing the chance that temporary successes become permanent vulnerabilities. Conclusion: small rules, repeated execution, and a life worth building. The thread running through every chapter is practical. Small, repeatable rules, implemented consistently, create optionality and compound into lasting wealth. Start with 3 actions this week. Automate a margin transfer. Write a 1-page rulebook that defines 2 spending rules and 1 investment guardrail, and run a 12-day pilot on a modest asymmetric idea. Document what you learn in a decision ledger and schedule a short monthly review to protect progress. Wealth is not a single event, but the accumulation of disciplined choices, calibrated risk, networked partnerships, and purposeful giving. If this summary provided value, subscribe to the channel and like the video to support more practical, evidence-based content. Your engagement helps this work reach others who prefer tested tactics over hype. Apply one rule today, measure the outcome, refine the rule, and repeat. Over time, those small iterations build both freedom and meaning.